You know, there's something very peculiar about what we call awakening. People imagine it as a kind of glorious illumination, fireworks in the sky, angels singing, the sudden arrival of infinite peace. But in truth, it's much more mischievous than that. It sneaks up on you like a cat. It creeps into your awareness, not with trumpets and hallelujahs, but with a subtle and somewhat unsettling whisper. Perhaps things are not quite what you thought they were. And that's where it begins, not in certainty, but in doubt. You start to notice cracks in the world you've built, fissures in the familiar pattern of things. It's not that life changes overnight. It's that your eyes begin to see differently. The colors seem sharper, but also stranger. The people you've known for years look the same, and yet something's missing. Or maybe something's been added that was never visible before. You realize you've been playing a game, a marvelous, complicated, exhausting game called being somebody. And for a long time, you were quite good at it. You learned the rules, you collected the points, you compared your score to everyone else's. You played who's successful, who's respectable, who's spiritual. And you took it all terribly seriously, as if the universe itself were keeping track. But one day, the veil slips. You catch a glimpse, just a flash, that all of this might be theater. You see your role, your mask, your costume, and for a moment, you can't tell whether you're acting the part of a person or whether the part is acting you. And in that instant, something deep inside begins to laugh, a quiet, knowing laugh. Because it dawns on you that you've been taking this play far too literally. You've mistaken the stage for the world, the script for the story, the character for the self. Now, this moment of realization is both exhilarating and terrifying. Exhilarating because you feel the first breath of freedom, terrifying because you begin to sense that the person you've always been may not survive what's coming. When you really begin to wake up, it feels as though someone has moved all the furniture in your mind. The walls don't line up where they used to. The floor wobbles slightly. Everything is still there, and yet nothing is quite the same. It's as if you've been living in a dream, and the dream is starting to fade, but you're not quite awake yet either. You're in that strange in-between where the dream dissolves, but the day hasn't fully dawned. And here's the curious part. The first reaction of most people is to try to go back to sleep, because waking up isn't comfortable. It doesn't flatter the ego. It doesn't tell you that you're special. It tells you the opposite, that there is no one to be special. It tells you that the self you've been protecting and polishing all these years is a ghost made of thought. The mind protests, surely not. Surely I am real. I have opinions, desires, memories. Yes, yes, but so does a dream character. And when the dream ends, where do they go? You see, awakening begins the moment you start to suspect that you are the dreamer, not the dream. And that suspicion grows until the whole structure of me and my world begins to tremble. At first, you think something is wrong. You feel anxiety, loss, disorientation. You might even say, I'm losing my mind. But what you're really losing is your grip. And what a relief that is, because it was that very grip, that constant effort to hold life still, that kept you asleep in the first place. When you loosen the grip, life moves of its own accord. You find that breathing happens, thoughts happen, heartbeat happens, without anyone doing them. You begin to suspect that existence itself doesn't need your permission to be beautiful. And this realization, gentle, uninvited, unstoppable, is the first tremor of awakening. It's not an arrival, but an undoing. Not the gain of wisdom, but the loss of certainty. You begin to see that reality has been quietly alive beneath your ideas all along, just waiting for you to stop describing it. It's quite marvelous, really. But also dangerous, because once you've had that glimpse, you can't unsee it. The curtain doesn't fall back into place. You can play the game again, but you'll never quite believe in the rules. You'll never again be entirely convinced by the story of me and mine. And that, my friends, is where awakening truly begins. Not in knowing more, but in knowing less. In the humble astonishment of realizing that everything you took to be solid, your opinions, your ambitions, even your sense of identity, is made of the same stuff as clouds. They take on shapes, yes, but try to hold one in your hand and it vanishes into thin air. So awakening is not the gaining of something new, it is the seeing through of what was never real. It's the laughter that bubbles up when you recognize the cosmic joke, that you were never apart from anything, never lacking, never trapped except by the idea that you were. You wake up, and the world remains exactly as it was, yet nothing is as it was before. When awakening deepens, something quite dramatic begins to happen, though not always in fireworks and visions. It happens quietly, almost politely, like a guest who slips out of a room without saying goodbye. What leaves you is the image of yourself. You see, for years, perhaps your whole life, you've lived surrounded by mirrors. Not glass mirrors, but the mirrors of other people's eyes, of words, of social approval and disapproval. They have reflected back to you a picture, and you've called that picture me. And naturally, you've polished it, adjusted it, decorated it, because you wanted that reflection to look right, to fit in, to be admired. Now, when awakening starts, those mirrors begin to crack. What you took to be your face was only a reflection, and suddenly, the glass is full of hairline fractures. It's unnerving, because the person you see looking back doesn't hold together anymore. The edges blur. The familiar expression changes. You wonder, who am I really, if this picture isn't stable? Most people, at this point, try desperately to glue the mirror back together. They reinforce their opinions, their beliefs, their titles. I'm still somebody. I have a career, a reputation, a mission. But the more you insist on being someone, the more the cracks widen, because the light coming through those fractures is too bright to ignore. And one day, you realize this mirror was never showing your real face at all. It was showing an echo of habit, a collage made of memories and expectations. Every thought of I should and I must added another layer of silver paint to the glass until you couldn't see through it anymore. Now it's breaking, and that's not a tragedy. It's a kind of mercy. For as long as you could see only your reflection, you could not see the world. You were locked inside a hall of mirrors, mistaking the reflections for reality. You can notice this even in simple conversation. Someone praises you, and instantly you feel a little taller. Someone criticizes you, and suddenly you shrink. See how the image dances, how it reacts? And you call that dance myself. But the self that depends on mirrors must keep checking them every moment to be sure it exists. Awakening smashes those mirrors, not out of cruelty, but because it's the only way you'll notice the open sky beyond them. You don't lose your face. You discover that you never needed one so rigidly defined. And here comes the strange beauty of it. When you no longer cling to the reflection, you become transparent. Life shines through you, instead of being blocked by you. You laugh more easily. You cry without shame. You begin to see that emotions are not personal possessions, they're movements of the tide. There's a story, a very short one, about a man who carried a hand mirror everywhere he went. He would check his face constantly, terrified that if he didn't, it might disappear. Then one day, the mirror fell and shattered on the ground. In horror, he looked down into the broken shards and found, for the first time, the whole sky reflected there. You see, that's what happens. When the mirror breaks, the world rushes in. The boundary between in here and out there softens. You stop being a thing that looks at life and start being the looking itself. The eyes no longer belong to an observer. They belong to the universe seeing through you. Now, this sounds poetic, but it's also very practical. because the person you thought you were, the planner, the warrior, the achiever, begins to loosen their grip. You find yourself speaking more honestly, acting more spontaneously. You don't have to decide who to be in every situation, you just respond. The actor steps off stage, and life takes over the performance. Of course, society doesn't quite know what to do with such a person. They'll say he's changed, she's different, and they're right, but not in the way they think. You haven't become something new. You've stopped pretending to be something old. And the irony is, once you no longer depend on the mirror, you can truly enjoy it. You can look into other people's eyes and play the game of personality again, but playfully. You can wear masks, but you know they're masks. You can act, but you no longer mistake the part for the player. So the shattering of the mirror is not destruction, it's revelation. The image dies, but the reality behind the image, the living, breathing awareness that was always here, remains untouched, unscathed, radiant. And when the pieces of the mirror finally fall away, you may find yourself standing quietly, perhaps in the middle of an ordinary day, realizing that you have never actually been apart from anything at all. The reflection has vanished, and for the first time, you see directly. And then, my friends, something else begins to happen, something that can be quite disconcerting. Once the mirror has shattered and the image of yourself begins to fade, the whole world seems to lose its flavor. The colors dim, the music stops. All the things that once made you rush about with such importance, your ambitions, your plans, your careful sense of direction, suddenly appear rather hollow. It is as if the wind that once filled the sails of your life has died away, and your ship drifts silently across a still sea. You may look around and ask, what now? What am I supposed to do? But, of course, that very question presumes there's a someone left to do the doing. And that, you see, is exactly what's vanishing. This is the stage where awakening feels less like enlightenment and more like loss. You might even call it the great unmeaning. The symbols and stories that used to move you no longer make sense. Success doesn't sparkle, failure doesn't sting. You see through the glitter of the game, and for a while you feel like you've fallen out of the world entirely. But this collapse of meaning isn't a mistake. It's the natural consequence of discovering that the meanings you once lived by were inventions. They were scaffolds, helpful while you were building, but never meant to be permanent. Think of it like this. For years, you were reading a novel and completely absorbed in it. The plot was thrilling, the drama, the romance, the struggle for success. You identified with the hero so completely that their pain was your pain, their triumph your triumph. And then, one day, you look up from the page and realize you're the reader, not the character. The story goes on, but you're no longer inside it. Now, many people experience this moment and panic. They say, I've lost my passion, I've lost my purpose. But what's actually happening is far subtler. You haven't lost anything real, you've simply stopped believing that the fiction was reality. The trouble is, our entire society is built on shared fictions. The fiction of achievement, of progress, of ownership, of becoming someone. When you wake up and see these as stories, you may feel estranged from the world, not because the world has vanished, but because the spell has broken. You find yourself at a dinner party where everyone's discussing the stock market or the latest scandal, and you smile politely, but you can no longer pretend to care. It's not that you think you're superior, it's just that the strings that once pulled your heart no longer reach you. You've slipped out of the puppet show, and the puppets are still dancing. This, incidentally, is why the sages of every tradition have spoken about a dark night or a desert of the soul. It's the moment between illusions, when the old dreams are gone and the new reality hasn't yet revealed itself. You can't go back to sleep, but you haven't yet learned to live awake. And here lies a great paradox. Though it feels empty, This is actually the beginning of fullness. For the first time, you are no longer chasing life, you are resting in it. You're not struggling to make the world meaningful. You're allowing meaning to arise on its own, like a fragrance from a flower that needs no name. At first, you might say, everything feels meaningless. But if you listen closely, what you're really saying is, everything no longer needs my meaning. The world doesn't need your justification to exist. The birds sing without knowing why. The stars burn without purpose. The ocean crashes against the shore without mission or reward. And it's all perfectly all right. When you begin to sense this, you may laugh, not out of cynicism, but relief, because all along you were exhausting yourself, trying to hold up the sky with ideas, and now the sky holds itself. And so, the collapse of meaning is the surrender of false gravity. You stop orbiting the imaginary sun of your ambitions and realize that you were never separate from the light that made them shine. Now, people sometimes ask, but if life has no fixed meaning, how can we go on living? And the answer, of course, is that you never stopped. Even as you questioned everything, your heart kept beating, your lungs kept breathing, your thoughts kept coming and going like waves on the sea. Life was living you all along, whether you thought it had meaning or not. The collapse is not an ending. It's the clearing of the field. The weeds of should and must have been pulled up, leaving bare soil for something wild to grow. And that something, that quiet, effortless movement of life without the interference of the ego, is the beginning of authentic living. You see, meaning doesn't die in awakening. It's reborn as wonder. The mind no longer dictates what matters. The heart simply marvels that anything is at all. You find yourself moved by a sunset, or the sound of wind through leaves, or the laughter of a stranger, and you can't explain why. But it doesn't matter. The explanation would only cheapen it. This is why the awakened smile so often. They know that the game is both real and unreal. They can enjoy the play again, but lightly, without clinging to the plot. They have passed through the collapse of meaning and come out the other side into the freedom of simply being. And so, when everything seems to fall apart, remember, it's only the scaffolding collapsing. The building itself, life, this astonishing mystery of existence, stands untouched. And now we come to perhaps the most unsettling part of all the discovery, that there was never a you doing life in the first place. You see, the idea that I am the one doing it is so deeply ingrained that to question it feels like blasphemy. We are taught from childhood to be in control, to make choices, to take responsibility, to push the river along as if it needed our help to flow. But when awakening ripens, this little controller begins to wobble on its throne. You start to notice something strange. Breathing happens, thoughts happen, feelings rise and fall, the body walks, speaks, digests its food, dreams at night all by itself, and suddenly a very simple yet astonishing question appears. Who is doing all this? The more closely you look, the more elusive the doer becomes. The moment you try to find it, it hides behind another thought, another impulse, another story. I am thinking, you say. But who decided to think that thought? I am walking, you claim. But did you really tell your legs how to move? The truth begins to dawn. This I is not the author but the echo. It's a commentary written in the margins of life, claiming credit for a book it didn't write. Now, don't misunderstand, this isn't an invitation to fatalism or passivity. It's an invitation to wonder, because the realization that you are not the doer doesn't paralyze you. It liberates you. You discover that life has been unfolding perfectly well without your management. The heart doesn't need a supervisor to beat. The sun doesn't rise because someone remembers to set an alarm. But for a while, the ego panics. It says, if I'm not in control, everything will fall apart. And yet, when you actually let go, things don't collapse, they harmonize. You stop forcing and start flowing. You stop arguing with what is and begin to dance with it. It's rather like trying to row a boat with your hands in the water, splashing and straining, when all along there was a current carrying you downstream. The moment you stop fighting, the current takes over, and you realize that it had been moving you all along. Of course, this surrender is not something you can do, because that would still be the doer trying to get rid of itself. It happens naturally, when the futility of control is seen clearly enough. When you've exhausted yourself trying to make life obey your will, a kind of sweet weariness sets in. You stop pushing, and instantly you float. Now, some people imagine that awakening means becoming detached, withdrawn, like a monk sitting on a mountaintop. But when the doer dies, you don't retreat from life, you finally participate in it. You act, but without the strain of acting. You move, but without the fear of mistakes. The great actor steps off the stage and realizes he was the play all along. You might be washing dishes, driving a car, talking to a friend, and suddenly there's this sense that everything is simply happening. The hands wash, the eyes see, the voice speaks, and there's no me behind it pushing the buttons. The universe is moving as this body, this mind, this moment. And it's so effortless that you can't help but laugh. Because for years, you believed yourself to be this little pilot sitting in the cockpit of your skull, tugging at levers, worrying about turbulence, when in fact, the plane was flying itself the entire time. This is why enlightened people often seem so ordinary. They don't announce themselves as sages or saints. They're just fully present. They eat when they're hungry, sleep when they're tired, laugh when something's funny. They're no longer living according to an idea of how life should be. They're living as life itself. And that's the death of the doer. Not a grim death, but a joyous one, like shedding a costume that never quite fit. The energy that once went into control, worry, and manipulation becomes free for love, for creativity, for play. You might say that life begins to live you like a song sings itself. There's still melody, still rhythm, still movement, but no conductor, no performer separate from the music. The whole thing is one event, consciousness dancing in infinite disguise. So when you finally see that you never were the doer, you don't stop doing, you stop claiming. And that makes all the difference. You no longer say, I am breathing. You simply notice there is breathing. You don't say, I am living. You see, life is happening as this. And then, quite effortlessly, you discover the profound simplicity that was hidden in plain sight. There is no separate self at the controls. Only the vast intelligence of the universe pretending for a while to be a person. You realize that you are not a puppet pulled by strings. You are the strings, the puppet, and the unseen hands that move them. And that realization, though it sounds like nothing, is the quiet thunder of true freedom. The doer dies, and in its absence, the dance begins. After the death of the doer, there is a silence. Not the silence of a quiet room or the pause between words, but a vast, open silence, as though the very structure of reality has taken a deep breath and stopped for a moment. You look around, and life is still here, the trees, the sky, the sound of traffic, the rhythm of your heartbeat, yet everything feels weightless, untethered. You are here, and yet not quite as you were. The old identity has slipped away, but the new one has not yet arrived. This is the void between selves. And it can be the most disorienting stage of awakening, because the mind has lost its anchor but hasn't yet learned to float. For years, you navigated life using coordinates, beliefs, desires, goals, relationships. They told you who you were and where you were going. Now the compass spins wildly, the map dissolves, and you find yourself in a vast field with no signposts at all. And of course, the mind panics. It says, something's gone wrong, I'm empty, I'm lost. But you see, it's not you who is lost. It's only the voice that thought it was in charge. What's really happening is that consciousness has withdrawn its energy from the story of me and is resting in itself still, vast, undefined. It can feel like falling, but there's nowhere to fall. It can feel like dying, but nothing is being killed. It is simply that the wave has realized it is the ocean, and for a while it forgets how to be a wave. Many spiritual traditions describe this moment as the dark night of the soul. But the darkness is not evil. It is the absence of false light. It is the night before dawn, when the stars of illusion have burned out and the sun of reality has not yet risen. In this space, there is no meaning, no movement, no sense of self. And that's precisely its purity. For the first time, life is not being filtered through identity. It's just being. Imagine a room that has been cluttered for decades, filled with furniture, boxes, ornaments, old memories stacked to the ceiling. One day, everything is cleared out. You walk in, and at first, you say, it's so empty. But then, if you stay long enough, you notice something astonishing. The room was never the furniture. The room was always the space. And so, in the void between selves, you discover that you are not what filled your consciousness. You are the space in which everything appears. Thoughts, sensations, emotions, they come and go like weather, but the sky remains. At first, this emptiness can feel unbearable because the ego interprets it as annihilation. If there is no me, it whispers, then who will live? Who will love? Who will care? But as the silence deepens, another understanding emerges that this very emptiness is not dead at all. It is alive. It hums quietly with potential, like the still air before a storm or the blank page before a poem. And gradually, something begins to move again, not from effort, but from grace. A thought arises, but you no longer chase it. A feeling appears, but you no longer label it. You start to see that existence itself, this immediate, unfiltered now, is complete. It doesn't need to become anything. There is a profound peace in that recognition. Because in the void, there is nothing to defend, nothing to achieve, nothing to prove. The striving has ended. The machinery of self-concern winds down, and in its place is a simple awareness, clear, silent, vast, like a mountain lake reflecting the whole sky. Now, you might say, but isn't that nothingness frightening? Yes, at first, because it strips away everything familiar. But the longer you rest in it, the more you realize that it's not nothing, it's no thing. It's not an absence, but a presence too immense to be defined. You are not drifting in a void, you are the void. You are the vast openness in which all experience arises. The silence is not outside of you, it is your very essence. And once that realization begins to dawn, the fear vanishes like mist in sunlight. You understand that the void is not the end of life, it is the ground of it. Every thought, every breath, every star is born out of this stillness and dissolves back into it. The Buddhists call it shunyata, emptiness, but perhaps a better word is fullness. Because when there is no separate self left to grasp or to want, the entire universe rushes in to fill the space. You feel the breeze, not as air touching you, but as the universe moving through itself. You hear a sound, and there is no listener apart from it, only hearing, pure and simple. And then something miraculous happens. The silence begins to sing, not with notes or melody, but with the quiet joy of being. You find that this stillness is not a void to escape, but a home to inhabit. The void between selves becomes the womb of the new life, not a return to who you were, but a flowering of what you always were before you called yourself anything at all. So don't be afraid of the emptiness. Don't rush to fill it with new beliefs, new goals, or new identities. Sit with it. Breathe it. Let it breathe you, for out of this infinite silence will come a movement, effortless, spontaneous, true, and that movement is what we call living. When you emerge from the void, you will not be reborn as a different person. You will simply realize that you were never anything but this pure awareness, quietly watching the universe play. And from that silence, the real dance begins. And then, quite without warning, life returns. Not the old life, bustling with plans and anxieties, but a new rhythm, so natural it hardly feels like yours. The river begins to flow again, though now you realize it was never dry. You were simply fighting the current. Out of the great silence, movement arises. The breeze stirs the trees, the birds resume their song, and you find yourself laughing, because it's all so simple, and you cannot remember why you ever thought it had to be complicated. You see, when the false self dissolves, life doesn't vanish. It blooms. It blooms like a field after rain, like music returning after a pause. You move, you speak, you act, but now there's no I behind the action. There's only the doing, fresh and effortless. This is what I call authentic living. Not a new moral code, not a new philosophy, but the spontaneous play of existence. Before awakening, you lived life as a task, something to manage, improve, and survive. After awakening, you live it as a dance. A dance, mind you, without choreography. No one tells the wave how to move, and no one instructs the flame how to flicker. They do what they are, and in that, there is perfect order. When you see this, something beautiful happens. You stop trying to improve the moment. You stop arguing with what is. You no longer treat life as a problem to be solved, but as a mystery to be experienced. You see, the self that was always striving to become, to be better, to be enlightened, to be good enough, was chasing a mirage. It imagined that peace was waiting somewhere in the future, if only it could perfect itself. But now, the chase is over, and in the stillness that remains, you notice something utterly obvious. You were never outside of peace. You were the peace pretending to be a seeker. This is why I say that awakening destroys your old life, because the old life was built on becoming. It was fueled by effort and maintained by tension. It depended on a world of opposites, success and failure, spiritual and worldly, good and bad. When those opposites collapse, what remains is not indifference, but ease. You begin to live not for something, but as something. You are no longer the actor on the stage trying to remember your lines. You are the play itself, unfolding in perfect spontaneity. And what's marvelous is that this new way of living looks, from the outside, almost ordinary. You still eat breakfast, pay bills, brush your teeth, fall in love, but inwardly, there's a vast simplicity. There's no one left to be anxious about how things turn out. You're no longer trying to use the moment to reach the next one. Each moment is complete in itself. You might be walking to the store, feeling the sunlight on your skin, and suddenly realize this, right here, is enough. The simple act of walking, breathing, seeing, it's all a miracle, because it's all happening by itself. Before awakening, you were always preparing to live. After awakening, you're simply living. Now, don't think that this means life becomes free of difficulty. Storms still come. People still argue. Bodies still age. But the difference is that you no longer stand apart from these things, resisting them, The rain falls, and you are the rain. The argument rises, and you are the sound of voices. The body aches, and you are the sensation itself, not the one it happens to. Out of this realization grows a quiet compassion, because when you see that everything moves by the same life, you can't help but feel tenderness for it all, even for the so-called troubles. You begin to love people not for who they are supposed to be, but for what they are in this moment, fleeting expressions of the same mystery that breathes through you. This is why awakened people often appear light-hearted. They take nothing personally, because there is no person left to offend. They forgive easily, because they see that every being is doing exactly what the universe must do at that instant. They act kindly, not because a rule commands it, but because kindness flows naturally when the illusion of separation falls away. So the emergence of authentic life is not the creation of a new self. It is the recognition that life itself was the self all along. The trees were never outside you. The clouds were never above you. They were all in you, as you, appearing to you. And now you can play again. You can rejoin the dance of the world, shake hands, make plans, laugh, argue, create art but lightly, joyfully. As a musician plays a tune he knows is only for the moment. That is authenticity. To act without attachment, to love without ownership, to speak without pretense, to be utterly human, knowing there is nothing to protect and no one to perfect. And when you live like this, you don't call it enlightenment, you don't call it spirituality, you just call it living, which is what it was always meant to be. The rain falls, the wind blows, the sun rises, and you, the eternal witness pretending to be a person, smile and say, "Ah, yes, of course, this is how it's always been." And that smile, that unforced, quiet smile, is the signature of an authentic life. And now, as life begins to flow effortlessly again, you notice something else, something so simple, so obvious, that it feels almost impossible to describe. The line between you and everything else begins to fade. The great divide between subject and object, inside and outside, self and other, it melts like mist under the morning sun. At first, this is a subtle thing. You might be sitting by a river, watching the water move, and suddenly you feel that the watching and the flowing are the same act. You don't know where your eyes end and the river begins. The sound of it, the glimmer of light, the feeling of breath moving in your chest, it's all one event, one great happening. And for the first time, you understand what the mystics meant when they said, "There is no observer, only observation." The sense of "I am here and the world is out there" was only a convenient fiction. You see, we were taught to think of ourselves as tiny beings, fragile bags of skin, wandering around on a vast planet, trying to survive. But this, of course, is like believing that a wave is separate from the ocean, or that a leaf is separate from the tree. When the illusion of separation fades, you realize you were never in the universe was always in you. It's a remarkable discovery, and yet it feels entirely natural, as though you're remembering something you always knew. Because in truth, you've never been separate from anything, not even for a moment. The boundary between self and world was always imaginary, drawn in thought and believed by habit. When this understanding dawns, love takes on an entirely new meaning. You no longer love people as others. You love them as yourself, not as an idea, but as an experience. Their joy feels like your joy. Their suffering stirs in your own heart, not as pity, but as participation. You don't choose compassion. Compassion is simply what happens when there's no you left to stand apart. And you see, this is why harm becomes impossible. The hand cannot stab the foot without the whole body suffering. Likewise, when you understand that you and the world are one living organism, kindness is not a virtue but a form of intelligence. But this realization also brings a curious sense of humor. You watch people arguing, defending their little patches of identity, insisting on their separate importance, and you can't help but smile. It's as though the ocean waves are quarreling about who owns the sea. Not that you feel superior, quite the opposite. You understand that you too were once lost in that game. You played the role of me, protecting, comparing, competing, and now that the mask has slipped away, you feel only tenderness for the masks still in place. There's a great freedom in this. You no longer need to convince anyone of anything. You no longer feel compelled to change the world, because you realize that the world, in all its joy and madness, is the eternal dance of yourself, and you can only dance with it, not against it. You begin to see that every encounter, even the difficult ones, are parts of a single choreography. The people who challenge you, the situations that test you, they are not intruders, but expressions of the same consciousness taking different forms to remind itself of what it is. So you move through life lightly. You meet someone's anger with understanding, because you can see the fear behind it. You meet someone's love with gratitude, because you know it's your own heart meeting itself. And slowly, you discover that the whole universe is communicating not through words, but through movement, pattern, energy. When the sense of separation dissolves, even death loses its grip. You realize that death can only happen to someone who was separate, but if there's no one apart from the whole, what could possibly die? The wave falls back into the ocean, but was it ever truly apart? So instead of mourning endings, you begin to celebrate transformations. The leaf falls, and the tree continues. The day fades, and the night breathes. The body grows old, and life renews itself through every living thing. And through all of this, you feel an extraordinary peace, not the peace of stillness alone, but the peace of belonging. You're no longer a stranger in a hostile world. You are the world, looking at itself with wonder. You find yourself smiling at the simplest things, the sound of rain, a child's laughter, even the hum of traffic. You smile because you can feel it all happening as you. And that smile is the mark of recognition, the universe acknowledging its own face. When separation disappears, love stops being something you do. It becomes what you are. And then, perhaps for the first time, you understand the real meaning of awakening. It's not about escaping life, not about transcending the human experience, but about embracing it so completely that there's no division left at all. You were never meant to rise above the world, you were meant to fall in love with it, utterly and without reserve. And so you walk through life now not as a seeker, not as an observer, but as the dance itself. Every gesture, every breath, every glance of light, another movement of the infinite, playing as you. This is the disappearance of separation, the end of loneliness, the end of searching, the end of needing to be anything other than what you already are. And when you truly see this, the world shines as it has always shone, brilliant, ordinary, divine. Now, after all of this, after the mirror has shattered, after meaning has collapsed, after the doer has died and the boundaries have dissolved, something beautifully ordinary happens. You go back to the world. Yes, the same world with its dishes to wash, bills to pay, traffic jams, and neighbors who play their music too loud. Awakening, you see, doesn't transport you to another planet. It simply shows you that this planet was heaven all along, once you stop trying to own it. This is what the old Zen masters call returning to the marketplace with open hands. The awakened person doesn't escape society, doesn't retreat into some shining cave of perfection. No, they go back to town. They sweep floors, drink tea, laugh with friends. They play their part, knowing full well it's a play. But the difference is this. Now they play with joy instead of fear. Before awakening, life was a contest. You had to prove something, to win, to be seen. Now, Life is a performance, an improvisation, where the point is not to succeed but to express. The enlightened one still moves through the same world as before, but they walk lightly, as if on tiptoe through a dream they no longer mistake for reality. You might say they live like an actor who remembers it's all theater. They can cry on stage and mean it fully, yet deep down, they know it's a role. And when the curtain falls, they bow and go home, content. To others, such a person may appear utterly normal. They still make small talk. They still forget their keys. They still stub their toes. But behind every gesture is a vast ease, a silent understanding that there is no someone performing these acts. There is only life, endlessly unfolding, and they are simply participating in its rhythm. You see, when you know it's a game, you can play it wholeheartedly. You can take care of your responsibilities, keep your promises, obey the laws, not because you must, but because doing so makes the play flow smoothly. You drive on the right side of the road not because it's sacred, but because it's practical. The awakened person honors convention without being enslaved by it. And that's the paradox. The freer you are inwardly, the more gracefully you fit into the world outwardly. You stop resisting, and harmony arises naturally. You don't need to preach morality. Your very being becomes its own quiet teaching. The awakened person pays their taxes and smiles because they know it's all part of the dance. They listen to someone's troubles, not as a therapist trying to fix them, but as one wave listening to another wave tell a story of the sea. They can love without clinging, give without pride, act without anxiety. They don't need to be extraordinary. The ordinary is miracle enough. And what's most astonishing is that after all the great revelations, life becomes simple again. Not dull, simple. You wake in the morning, you stretch, you sip your coffee, and the taste of it, the warmth, the aroma, the quiet moment before the day begins, that alone is enough to make you smile, because that moment contains the whole universe. People sometimes ask, if everything is illusion, why bother doing anything? But illusion doesn't mean unreal. It means play. The actor doesn't stop performing just because he knows it's a show. In fact, he performs even more beautifully because he's no longer afraid of the critics. Likewise, when you know life is a cosmic performance, you can finally enjoy it. You can laugh when things go wrong because the story is supposed to have twists. You can cry when it hurts because tears are part of the music. And through it all, you remain free because nothing can threaten what you truly are. You see, the return to the marketplace is the true test of awakening. It's easy to feel peaceful on a mountaintop. It's another thing entirely to feel peace in a traffic jam. The sage and the clerk, the monk and the mother, the artist and the accountant, all can live the awakened life if they remember that the world is not separate from the self. So you re-enter society, not as a prophet or a saint, but as a friend. You listen more than you speak. You find humor in the places you used to find frustration. You help others, not to improve them, but simply because helping is what love does when it walks down the street. And people around you may not understand what's changed. They might say, you seem calmer, or you don't get angry like you used to. They may not know why, and you can't quite explain it, because the truth isn't in the words, it's in the presence. That's how the awakened teach, not by preaching, but by being. Their laughter, their patience, their quiet eyes become sermons far greater than any spoken truth, and eventually you realize that there was never any real return. You never left the marketplace, you never left the world, you never left this. You were simply lost in a dream about who you were and what you needed to become. And now the dream has lifted, and here you are home, exactly where you've always been. That is the gentle ending of awakening, not a flash of glory, not trumpets in the sky, but a deep sigh of relief. You take another sip of tea, feel the sun on your skin, and think, Ah, yes, how marvelous it all is. And that, you see, is enlightenment, living as though everything was sacred, because it is. You see, when all this begins to settle, when the dust of awakening clears and life resumes its gentle rhythm, something extraordinary becomes clear. That destruction and creation were never enemies. They were two sides of the same eternal movement, forever chasing and birthing each other. From the beginning, existence has been playing this divine game of hide and seek, appearing, disappearing, forming, dissolving as waves rise and fall upon the same sea. But because we were caught in the illusion of permanence, we called the rising birth and the falling death. We called the building success and the collapse failure. We mistook rhythm for chaos, and in doing so, we suffered. But when you wake up, you begin to see that the universe is not a static thing. It's a dance. Every ending is a beginning seen from another angle. Every death clears space for new life, and every tear shed in grief waters the roots of compassion. We are trained to resist destruction, to hold on, to preserve, to cling to what was as though we could keep the tide from turning. Yet, when you truly see the nature of things, you understand that the tide itself is the beauty. It's the coming and going, the appearing and vanishing, that gives life its music. Imagine a piece of music that had only one note, held forever. It would cease to be music. It's the space between the notes, the silence that allows sound to move, that makes a melody possible. In the same way, it's the spaces of loss and change that make existence possible at all. And so, awakening isn't about escaping destruction. It's about realizing that destruction is creation, that the flame which burns the forest clears the way for seeds that could never sprout in shadow, that the death of an identity is the birth of freedom, that when something dear leaves your life, a job, a home, a person, a dream, it's not the universe punishing you, but transforming you. When you can see this, you stop clinging. You begin to trust the rhythm. You understand that when the dance changes tempo, you need only listen and move accordingly. The old dissolves not because it was bad, but because the song has shifted key. You might notice this even in small moments, the breath that comes and goes, the heartbeat that expands and contracts, the day that dies into night. The whole cosmos is pulsating like this, like the sound of a great drum being struck by an invisible hand. In and out, rise and fall, light and dark, destruction and renewal. And you are not apart from this rhythm. You are it. You are the pulse of the universe, pretending to be a person, learning through the illusion of beginnings and endings that it was never truly divided. This is why awakened people do not mourn change. They marvel at it. They see the leaf fall and smile, because they know the leaf is returning to its source, and the tree will bloom again. They watch relationships end, and though the heart may ache, it no longer despairs. The pain itself becomes a kind of sacred music, bittersweet, necessary, whole. To live awakened is to surrender to this dance, to stop demanding that life be only one half of its rhythm. We want only creation, only growth, only joy, but to want life without death is to want a song without silence, a fire that never consumes its fuel. You cannot have the one without the other. And once you see that, your resistance softens into awe. There's a curious peace that comes with this understanding. You realize that every destruction in your life, every heartbreak, every failure, every moment you thought you couldn't go on, was not the end, but a kind of pruning. The universe was shaping you, sculpting you, cutting away. What you could not see was holding you back. And then, in hindsight, you laugh. You see that what you thought was ruin was revelation. You were not being punished, you were being freed. Even death itself, that great taboo we fear and deny, becomes part of this rhythm. You understand that the self which dies was never real to begin with. What you are, the consciousness watching this dance, is not born and cannot die. It merely changes costumes, shifts scenes, plays new roles on the stage of eternity. And when this sinks in, truly sinks in, every day becomes precious beyond measure. Not because it's fleeting, but because it's eternal in disguise. The sunrise and the sunset, the laughter and the tears, they are all the universe, renewing itself endlessly. So, don't be afraid when things fall apart. Don't curse the storm when it comes. Remember, storms clear the air, fires renew the soil, and endings are only the universe catching its breath before beginning again. Awakening teaches you to trust this, to let go when life asks you to let go, to love when life asks you to love, to laugh when life asks you to laugh, and to weep when life asks you to weep, all the while knowing that the dancer and the dance were never separate. For the great secret, the quiet joke of it all, is that you are the rhythm itself. You are the stillness between the beats, the pulse of being that gives rise to creation and destruction alike. And when you realize this, you finally stop asking for permanence and start celebrating change. Because, as I like to say, the more it changes, the more it is the same thing doing it. The wave rises, the wave falls, and the sea remains. And so, after all the talking, all the explaining, all the dancing of words, there comes a time to be quiet. Because the truth we've been circling around, this thing called awakening, is not something that can be spoken, it can only be felt, or better still, recognized. You see, words are like fingers pointing at the moon. They're useful, but if you stare too long at the finger, you'll miss the moon entirely. And so, every teaching, even the most beautiful ones, must end in silence, because what they're pointing to is already here. All this talk of destruction and renewal, of losing yourself and finding yourself again, of emptiness and fullness, it's all been an elaborate game of hints, a set of signposts leading you back to what has never left. The great paradox is that awakening doesn't happen to anyone. It's the discovery that there was never anyone for it to happen to. The self that sought enlightenment vanishes like a mirage in sunlight, and what's left is what was always here, this simple, wordless awareness. So you come to the end of the journey and realize that there was no journey. There was only a deep forgetting, followed by a remembering. And even the remembering was just another movement of the whole, playing at being lost so it could delight in being found. Now, when I say silence, I don't mean the absence of sound. I mean the presence that underlies every sound, the quiet awareness that hears the rain, the ticking clock, the laughter, the tears. That's the true silence, the kind that doesn't begin or end. If you listen right now, really listen, you can feel it humming beneath everything. The world is not noisy at all. It's singing, and its song is silence itself. This silence is not something you must earn. It's what you are. The still point around which the universe spins, the witness that doesn't change, no matter what dramas unfold. And when you truly rest in that, something wonderful happens. You realize that you don't need to hold on to any teaching, any idea, even any experience. The truth is not something you can keep, it's what remains when there's nothing left to keep. Perhaps this is why the awakened smile so often. They have nothing to defend, nothing to prove, nothing to lose. Their joy is not in possessing truth, but in being it, silently, effortlessly, like a flower being fragrant or a star giving light. When you meet such a person, you can feel it. They might not say much. They might just laugh, or sit quietly, or pour you a cup of tea. But something in you relaxes in their presence. Something recognizes itself. Because their silence speaks in the oldest language of all the one before words. And so, the deepest teaching is not in philosophy or scripture, not even in meditation or practice. It's in presence. It's in the way life itself moves through you when you stop trying to manage it. It's in the stillness between thoughts, the space between breaths, the quiet awareness in which everything appears and disappears. The universe, after all, has been whispering this lesson from the very beginning. Every tree, every bird, every gust of wind has been saying, look, listen, there is no separation. There is no problem. All is well. And so, perhaps the only thing left to do is to sit for a moment and let that truth sink in, not as an idea, but as a realization. You are not on the path, you are the path. You are not searching for reality, you are reality. The game of awakening was only ever consciousness remembering itself, pretending for a time to be a lost traveler in a dream of its own making. And now the traveler smiles, for the journey has ended where it began, right here. So we end not with a conclusion, but with a bow, a gesture of gratitude to the grand illusion for playing its part so beautifully. And then, silence. Not the silence of absence, but the silence that says everything, the silence that was listening all along.